Chag Sameach, everyone. We're here to share some insights into the Seder, which we hope you can use for inspiration, either in preparation for the Seder or even as a Seder companion as you find yourself around your own table.
So a couple things here. The goal here is, as Jenny said, is to give you some guidance. And don't worry about which Haggadah you're using. If you're using a different Haggadah than we're referring to here. Although you will see there is actually a Haggadah we've been using at the shul called A Different Night by Noam Zion, Z-I-O-N, which is free, downloadable on the internet right now. So if you Google it up, and we perhaps will put a link to it, you can check that one out as well. Our goal here is to give you these opportunities to join with us. So hopefully, it gives you some insight. Take it, leave it. Hopefully it'll give some inspiration, bottom line.
So one thing that people don't always know is that every Haggadah has the same essential steps. There may be different commentaries or a different thematic approach to the Haggadah, but every Haggadah has these essential 15 steps, often referred to as simanim. And together, these 15 simanim add up together to make a Seder, which means order. So literally, we're creating some order around a story that we tell, around a complex set of rituals. And in a time like the one we're living in, where it seems that things are very chaotic and changing, and we're thrust out of all of our habituated patterns of life, it feels especially stabilizing this year to create a little bit of order around our experience of Pesach, of Passover. So we're going to begin with the song that we use at our Seder, which helps remind us of the steps and guides us through each sort of stopping point along the journey. And we have hand motions that go with this song. People do it different ways, but this is how we do it in our family. Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz Maggid rochatza motzi Matzah Maror korech shulchan orech Safun barech Halel nirsa. So let's break that down for a moment. We have Kadesh. We bring up the first cup of wine, sanctifying this moment. Urchatz, we ritually wash the hands without a blessing. Karpas, we dip a spring vegetable into salt water. Yachatz, we break that middle matzah. So there is a stack of matzot, we'll talk about that. There's a middle matzah that we take out that matzah and we break it, the broken part of which will become the Afikomen at the end of the Seder as we look for it. Maggid, we tell the story. Rochza, we wash our hands again, this time at a different level of preparation with a blessing as we prepare to actually eat the meal. Motzi Matzah, we taste that matzah we've been waiting for. Maror, we eat the bitter herbs. And then korech, we make that hillel sandwich with the sweet and the hot and spicy together on a piece of matzah. Shulchan orech, we sit at this table and we enjoy, hopefully, a lengthy, beautiful meal with even without rich conversation necessarily, but with a heartfelt intention about our own journey towards liberation this year as we sit at the Passover table. Safun, we look for the Afikomen, which will be our dessert. Barech, we say a blessing at the end of the meal, thanking God for the abundance of this food, but also in our lives. Hallel, we sing these songs of praise. And then finally, Nirtza. We're all done. The Seder has been completed.
Beautiful. So one of the traditions we have in our house, we do the past several years, is in addition to a Seder plate, traditional Seder plate, we also have something called a freedom plate. We take another type of plate, usually just even something just like this, one of the plates you might set at your table. We invite people to put items on the plate which represent them freedom this year. So for example, one year when our daughter was able to drive, she put the keys to drive, or her driver's permit, I think it was, on this, for example. One year, I think one of us recovered from an injury of some kind, we put like an ankle brace, on this one year. Different representatives of what it means freedom to you. I think I put a tennis ball one year and I started getting back into tennis after a long time of not playing for various reasons. So what does freedom mean to you this year? Representing an item. You can place them on the plate, not discuss it until the right time of the Seder, or right at any time of the Seder, maybe even during the dinner, the Shulchan Aruch, or just to start up the meal. It's a nice way to introduce people who are around the table with you, or in this case, on Zoom with you. Some you might not even know. So you say, tell us your name, perhaps tell us a little about you if we don't know you so well, and tell us what did you bring for the freedom plate this year. And obviously people at homes, they can just kind of show you what their freedom plate item is. Brings into freedom and chofesh down to your own self, your own neshama, your own soul.
Beautiful. So then the first significant step is Kadesh, lifting up that first cup of wine. And when we say Kiddush, as part of any ritual, what we're doing is sanctifying time. It's not so much that we're blessing the wine per se. The wine is a symbol of our joy in being grateful for this moment in time. And so when we say Kadesh, we really take a moment to realize that we are here for another Passover. A year has passed and we have lived long enough to be a part of this holiday and this ritual once again. And I want to make a special invitation that we think about Kadesh as setting aside everything else, right? So there's so many distractions in life all the time, and the time that we're living in right now feels particularly distracting. So much worry, anxiety, the situation constantly unfolding. But there's something incredibly divine, really, about being able to stop and say, no, those things do not rule me. I am able, as a free person, to stop and say, this is what's important right now, is to celebrate this moment. So it's really sort of setting a signpost in the sand and saying, everything that's going on, we set it aside because there's something holy and important here for us to do.
So the first step, Kadesh, then the first washing. And by the Kadesh, by the way, sometimes those at your table, we actually have people pour wine or juice for each other, not the individual person who's actually drinking this, but actually do it for other people as a sign of kind of royalty and serving, and each of us gets to serve one another. Another idea for Kadesh as well. For Chatz, exactly, we're washing our hands, something we're extraordinarily familiar with in this particular moment in our lives, hopefully every year and every time, but particularly right now given COVID-19. And some of the ideas about, cleansing and getting ready. It's an early part of our meal and kind of what it means to prepare spiritually for the meal, kind of take eating seriously. Perhaps this meal to eat slowly, to eat with intention and kavanah. This just the washing of our hands slows down the embrace quickly into the meal. And also it can mean about cleansing ourselves, kind of a little of a mini mikvah for the hands, Our hands have done many things over the year, hopefully, towards freedom and justice in the world, but also our hands sometimes can do things that are, not ideal. So idea is to kind of cleanse them spiritually, to purify them, kind of have them ready to really enjoy and hopefully guide us towards freedom. So you can ask people around our table, how can they be purified, not only our hands, but our world's hands, to help, particularly at this time, not just to cleanse ourselves from the disease, but also cleanse ourselves in our actions morally and ethically as well.
So the next step is karpas. We dip a spring vegetable. In my family growing up, we had parsley.
Same here.
So we've tried other vegetables in recent years, including cilantro, scallion. Jews who have found themselves all over the world have used what grows in their neck of the woods. So I encourage you to think about using another green vegetable, something that really represents spring and rebirth. So when we dip this vegetable, we dip it in salt water, and there's this amazing kind of combination of symbols that converge. On the one hand, we're dipping it in the salt water, which represents tears and sadness and grief over the experience of having been enslaved. And yet, the thing that we're dipping is this symbol of life, of new life, of the potential for growth and blossoming. So we're bringing together both our grief and our hope. What a perfect combination as we find ourselves during this time of pandemic.
So, we continue with the Seder. We did Kadesh, or Chatz, Karpas. Now, number 4, Yachatz. Chetzi, Chatz, means to cut in half or break in half. We have 3 matzot, which we have in our house. We have a special kind of matzah cover. Maybe you have it as well. 1 for each, three different types, and 1 particularly we break, and a small piece is now given for the Afikomen. If you do have someone who is comfortable hiding it, it could be a young person, it could be young at heart, who's willing to hide it out. If not, you just can take the Afikomen if you just don't, and you can place it to the side and cover it in some way, and just maybe put it to the side. It's kind of a piece of our life that needs to be kind of what is hidden from us. And that's kind of the deeper idea of Yachatz, is the idea here that, first of all, that our world is broken. You know, often at our table, Rabbi Jenny will lead this, that we sensitize ourselves to, and we ask questions of what part of our world is broken right now. There's some obvious ones, clearly. But even looking more globally and kind of beyond just the pandemic, you know, what parts of even our own hearts feel broken this time of year. People can share or perhaps keep it in their hearts. Sometimes we also offer a prayer of healing for those that are feeling broken in various ways, maybe physically even, literally, or certainly on the neshama and soul level, just feel certain brokenness, and we offer a prayer for them, a Misha Berach. But again, it's an opportunity to say, we're going to have this meal, it's going to be amazing, but there's going to be one little piece remaining. It's a long-standing tradition amongst us here, that nothing is full because there still are people that are struggling. So we're kind of putting a little piece out of our joy, a little taste out that we'll get later, but for now we're going to hold it back just to kind of remember those who are broken on the inside.
So from Yachatz, we actually move into the Maggid. The Maggid has that's the telling the story portion. There are lots of different moments within Maggid, and we're going to highlight some of the central components. Something just interesting to think about is that the Maggid, this telling, isn't just talking. There is the speaking is itself a ritual. There's a nice midrash that Pharaoh, is actually, if you break down the letters, Ra, bad mouth, an evil mouth, and that we're trying to move from Ra, or Paro, to Pesach, Passover, which could be broken down in an interesting sort of playful way to say the mouth that speaks. So we're moving from a sort of speechlessness, just a raw hurt and sorrow and pain, into a mouth and a heart that can actually assign language to our journey and to our experience, and ultimately to our freedom and liberation. So the first component of the Maggid is known as halachma. This is where we talk about the fact that this bread that we eat, this matzah, is the bread of poverty. And it's a Sephardi tradition to pass the matzah over your head. We sort of pass it around the table and people circle it around their heads. And it's tradition at this point even to say, all who are hungry, come and eat. And though we can't actually open our doors this year to let in anybody who would come and join us at our table, I think it would be a nice idea if you're sitting around the table with other people, or even if you're just thinking about it yourself, of who you would invite to your Seder this year. Who would you invite because they're in a position of need, or because you miss them, or because it would just be an incredible fantasy to have them around at your Seder table, but really who you would want to be at your table this year. We then move into the 4 questions. Now, we say the 4 questions as if it's some sort of statement, and it is. It's part of what often the youngest child will be called upon to recite at the table. But it's important to remember that the 4 questions, according to the Mishnah, were really questions that a parent should ask a child to stimulate their curiosity. So it's a night of questions. We're supposed to be curious. We're supposed to build out the story as big and as interestingly and as personally as possible. And so as a way of kind of getting us into beginner's mind and getting us into that place of like a childlike way of thinking about it with new curiosity, new energy, is to ask the 4 questions. And of course the 4 questions, the Ma Nishtana, help us examine what those primary food symbols are that sit on the Seder plate. Next is Avadim Hayinu. Avadim Hayinu is basically a short set of verses that we sing that say that once we were slaves and now we are free, really helping us to bring into our consciousness the fact that that this is not just a story about what happened to our ancestors, but this too is our story. And it's not only our story over the course of a lifetime, it's a story that's very present here and now. How was I not free a year ago as I sat around this table, and now I've evolved in some aspect of my being into a place that is free. So it's a very personal. So you may want to take this moment of the Seder to actually tell the story from the Torah of our people's exodus. It's a fun exercise for everybody around the table to contribute the details that they remember, the details that stand out to them. You may want to tell another story of redemption. Perhaps there's a story in your family or a personal story of going from some sort of narrow place into a place of freedom and redemption. Or maybe there are certain favorite parts, highlights of the story from the Haggadah that you want to focus on. But it's a great time to just begin to tell that story with the people who are at your table. The next part is the 4 children, often known as the 4 sons. And basically this part of the Seder encourages us to think about educationally how we want to approach the spirit of this holiday. And I think it's fair to say that the wise child is the one who understands that he or she or they are a part of this collective story and feel a sense of God's power and God's grace in helping make that redemption possible. Do you want to add anything about the 4 children?
No, except I think that we all identify with pieces of it, and it's okay to find that place. And in the end, I think there's also a question about the 5th child, who's not there. The fact that, as Rabbi Jenny noted, a lot of the difference in a wicked and wise child, you noted, don't have a lot of difference in their question. But ultimately, it's a lot about, ultimately the kind of theme is about who is we? Who is us? Am I part of it? Am I not? Is this my story? Is it my story? How can I make this my story? And the child is willing to be a part of that story, or a child takes themselves out, or perhaps, God forbid, is there ways that we, even unintentionally, keep some children or people out of the story? And how do we deal with inclusivity? I think is another kind of powerful question.
Awesome. So the next component are the plagues. That sort of has special resonance this year as we find ourselves actually amidst one plague, if not more. But I think it's powerful for us to even just have an opportunity to talk about what it's like. And it's not only the pandemic, it's the collapse of our economy, it's the sort of revealing of the ways in which our social safety nets are being tested and stretched in new ways. There's just so many ways to think about the difficulties that we're facing, not only as a Jewish community here in Raleigh, North Carolina, but really as a global community. So it's an invitation for a conversation about what it means to encounter a plague. And then finally, Dayenu. So we end our storytelling, so to speak, with a moment of gratitude, with the remembrance that amidst incredible difficulty, there is also triumph. And sometimes we overlook those pieces, but it's a great moment of the Seder not only to sing the song Dayenu, but also just to go around the table, even take some time just for yourself to scan your life and make a list of all the amazing miracles and blessings that if it were only for that one thing, it would have been enough. And yet there is still more. There is still more. Beautiful. All right, moving on to Rochza.
So I'm just going to say one last thing about the Maggid,
Sure.
just to echo what Rabbi Jenny said. Like, definitely the whole point of this thing is the telling of the story. So however you tell it, if you feel like the Midrash and explanations in Haggadah are not touching you, it's okay just to go around and tell the part. We now continue talking about Rochza, washing our hands, preparing for the meal. Very similar to how we wash hands ritually before eating challah, for example, on Shabbat or other times, before we make blessing over bread. And it reminds us back to the temple time in terms of purifying ourselves and our hands. But this one again, preparing for the meal. It's a slowing down as we prepare for the meal and for bread. And I really want to say also just honoring food intake. We're going to do that with the matzah and other things, but again, slowing it down just in this time when there was concerns about will there be enough food for most Americans, thank God, most, not all. This is not a typical concern, but it kind of raises the idea of what it means truly to be grateful, and can we slow down that process to appreciate it and cleanse ourselves off as well. We then turn to matzah.
Motzi matzah. This is the moment when we actually say both the blessing for eating of the bread and upon eating specifically the matzah. So matzah is a really interesting symbol, right? So on the one hand, it's the bread of poverty. It's simple. It represents a simple kind of faith. There are 3 essential ingredients, and that's what it is. And the matzah really helps us feel kind of our own humility. But it's also a reminder of our journey and our courage and our holy chutzpah that made it possible for us to be liberated and to experience freedom. And so it has both this quality of sort of simplicity and humility, but also the grandeur that comes with having lived through something difficult and made our way to freedom. So we really, as we eat the matzah, and there's sort of a requisite amount of matzah that you should eat. Be careful, you should take care of yourself, but it's a significant amount of matzah. Again, just as Rabbi Eric said, that it should be mindful, that you should just really know, there's no reason to speak while eating it. It's okay to take a moment as we eat all of these symbolic foods and just have no talking at the table. Really just taste, feel the texture, experience the process and the symbolism of these foods.
Sure. The next is maror. Bitter herbs. Now, in my house growing up, this was a competition to my uncle, my father, often, who would cry most or fastest, whatever. Depends what kind of chrein, as we called it in the Yiddish, you do. It's the purple or the white horseradish. Also, there's chazeret, which is a bitter lettuce that people use as well. It's more kind of Mizrahi practice, either one. But the maror, I think that one of the deepest messages of the maror, first of all, it's also dipped into charoseh, kind of mixes bitterness and sweetness. The fact in some things you appreciate sweetness, only sadly because you've been through the bitter. It's kind of that dynamic of coming together really appreciates one the other. That's one teaching around it. That's for life as well. And also the issue of maror, I think it's a profound conversation topic. Why are we crying? Why are we becoming sad? What is our bitterness for? Well, some is clearly to remember. That's no question. So a lot of this story is in this night's about remembering. But it's also about what does our bitterness do for us? And some of us have studied this together that, when I've gone through, or human beings have gone through bitter experiences, there are usually 2 different directions they go, perhaps both at the same time. One is, I've been through a bitter experience. I never want to have that bitter experience again. I'm doing everything I possibly can to stop that from happening again. Totally natural. And another reaction is, I've had this bitter experience. It's been absolutely terrible. I want to make sure no one else ever has this experience ever before. So there's an alertness to watching out. I should never be, God forbid, enslaved, attacked, oppressed ever again, or my people, my family, my tribe. And then there's experience saying, not only that, but I also want no other people, no other tribe, no other human being to experience that as well. I think it's an opportunity to talk about that in light of our current crisis, this situation has affected all people in all lands, but it's also affected people in unique ways. So how do we deal with our bitterness? How do we channel the bitterness, not just to suffer, but to contribute to some kind of protection for ourselves and for the world?
And along those lines, I think it's interesting that our tradition really invites us to talk about the bitterness, right? So one possible response to bitterness in life would be to bury it under the table. But we don't bury it under the table. We put it in the center of the table and we imbibe it. We bring it into our bodies and we have a conversation around it. And I think that's very powerful as well. So then we move into the korech, the sandwich. We make this Hillel sandwich. So at this point, we've introduced also the charoset, which doesn't have its own special blessing, but we bring it into the korach by sandwiching together some sweet charoset, some bitter herbs on the matzah, and it's really this moment of tremendous integration, right? We have all of these parts in our lives as well. We have these parts of the story, but we have these parts in our lives. Very few of us have lives that are only bitter or only sweet. A full life has all of these components, and so we take a moment to just bring it all together in the same way that it coexists within our lives.
And then now we are ready to actually have the meal. And for the meal, on Zoom in various ways, we're going to be doing this meal FaceTime. It's a little more complicated, but I think the idea of this meal towards the other meals, or these Seders, is to eat them, as we've noted before, mindfully. Perhaps a continued conversation about how this year's Seder, what will be the lessons we will teach from this year's Seder's experience. How even, the fact that we're not allowed to sit with everyone we want to sit with. I mean, that's a bitterness, but there could be also an appreciation of people in a unique way. Maybe also telling stories of what things would be like and what we look forward to at other meals. But also about the challenges in our country, those who are still not free. The fact that this challenge today, where's justice today, and where do we want to see that, both in the Jewish community, but also in America and across the world. So enjoying Shulchan Orech, a beautiful meal.
Great. And now we move on to Safun. This is the point in which we look for the Afikomen, and I really appreciate what Rabbi Eric said, that you don't need to have a child in your home to go find the Afikomen to perform this mitzvah. The Afikomen has some very deep symbolism for adults, really, about the idea that there are parts of ourselves over time that get broken off. We become sort of disassociated from, disconnected, fragmented. And when we take that, and oftentimes they're like the matzah, they're hard and they're painful, and they remind us of a difficult part of our journey. When we eat the Afikomen, we do many things, but among them, we end our meal. Our final taste in our mouth is that powerful symbol of our freedom, of having left Egypt. But it's also taking that part of ourself that might have been broken off in the past and claiming it again for ourselves, taking it back in a new way, weaving it into our story so that it's no longer cut off, hidden away in some pocket, physical or emotional, psychological, but we reclaim it as part of an integral whole of our journey, of our story.
And then last, as we conclude the meal, is a chance to offer gratitude, to be thankful, barech. I may not be everyone's custom to it at every meal, and there is a long, relatively traditional blessings you can do in the back of the Haggadah. But even if you just went and took a moment to thank all those who prepared the meal here, to be aware of how the food got to your table, right? I mean, on some level, it originates from the holy source with a capital S, okay? But there are people like farm workers who are essential, that made that come here. People in the grocery store, people that deliver the trucks, etc. There's a long chain. And getting aware of that process, even how it was in the soil and how it was nurtured over time by farmers and by nature, by rain. That entire process is clearly magical. Even if we can say scientifically we understand, it's still a magical process. It's miraculous in the language that we would use. So to take that time to even say out loud, We thank you, O Holy One, for this amazing meal, these amazing people who prepared the meal, those whose hands touched this process, the guiding, the love, the support that nourished every bone in our body, that allows us to sit here with the privileges. We thank you for that privilege. As I say, Diana, that'd be a beautiful blessing unto itself.
Great. And so at this point, we have the third cup of wine. And we have 2 additional special cups. At our table, we have these other decorative cups that sort of stand out. One being Elijah's cup and another one for Miriam. But you don't have to have a special one that was made specifically for that purpose. Any designated cup will work. For Elijah's cup, we fill it with wine. And for Miriam's cup, because she's associated with the well that traveled with the Israelites through the desert, that we fill it with water. So with Elijah's cup, we typically go to the door, we open the door, we welcome in Elijah. It's a symbolic moment of hope that one day Elijah, who is thought of to be the harbinger of the Messiah or the Messianic time, that we welcome in not only Elijah himself, but we welcome in a spirit of hopefulness. And I think this year we need that as much as we ever had. And with Miriam's cup, we could sometimes do different things. Sometimes we each pour a little bit of our own water into Miriam's cup. Sometimes when we're not as obsessed with germs, we'll each drink from Miriam's cup. But the idea is that Miriam's cup also is a cup of water that represents hope, that represents healing. So oftentimes we'll express a wish for healing in the world.
So we are getting close to the end of our Seder, towards the end. We've made the blessings and thank God for the meal and the third cup and the cups of Miriam and Elijah, Eliyahu. We then, and for Elijah, of course, typically open the door to see if Elijah is going to herald the Messiah. And then we say thank you. Thank you to God additionally, really praising God, what's called Hallel. Hallel. There's various psalms. Some of the psalms are we going to demonstrate together?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, so I thought we should open the Haggadah? Or
Yeah,
just, okay.
So we picked out 3 that we love in our family. And you can find them in any Haggadah. The first one is Ilufinu. Sometimes we do this on Shabbat. It's actually part of the section of Hallel, which will be listed as Nishmat Kol Chai. And these words Ilufinu mean even if the sea were filled with words, with song, with feelings of gratitude, it still wouldn't be enough. That's how grateful we feel to be in this moment. And this is how we sing it. Ilululu, 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 malele shirakaya, ilululu, 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 malele shirakaya. And also Min HaMetzah, one of the classics, goes like this. Min HaMetzah garatia anani v'merchavia. Min HaMetzah garatia anani v'merchavia. Anani, anani, anani v'merchavia. Anani, anani, anani v'merchavia. From a difficult place, we called out to you, O God, and you responded to us in a wide place as well. Beautiful, wide place of God. And then there's, of course, the beautiful words of Cooley. We ask that God open up the gates of righteousness for us and allow us to be free. And so there are lots of melodies for this song, but we'll choose one that we particularly love and encourage you to make it your own. פיתחו לי שערי צדק אברהם הודיה 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 זה ישר לאדוני צדיקים יבואו בו זה ישר לאדוני צדיקים יבואו בו. So from there we move to the fourth cup of wine, if you're still awake. And at this point, after we've said, we've drunk the fourth cup of wine, we're really ready for Matzah, that final moment of saying that we've done every part of this Seder to the best of our ability, and we have completed this process for this year. And I want to suggest that this year in particular, we know that it's not like Seders of the past. There are so many ways in which this year is more difficult in terms of our preparation, in terms of the state of our world, in terms of not being able to be together. And so I really just want to encourage us to be gentle with each other and with ourselves. There may be parts of the Seder that didn't go as well as we would have liked. Maybe there are parts that we skipped or that we didn't understand, or the person who typically leads our Seder is not present with us, and there may be a feeling of sadness or guilt, but the Matzah moment is the moment when we let that go. We let it go and we say we have done the best we could with what we had, and this is our offering. There's one other component that's important for the second night Seder, and that is the beginning of the counting of the Omer.
Yes, so the idea being that there are 7 weeks between Passover and a holiday of Shavuot. Agriculturally, they are connected together. Shavuot's the time of the first fruits, and we bring some wheat every day in the temple over this time, 49 times, leading to 50th day Shavuot, but also a connection Passover and Shavuot meaning weeks later, because Passover time of our freedom, but according to the calculations done by the rabbis, that's 7 weeks later, and by the Torah, we receive the Torah on Mount Sinai. So we're making a connection towards our freedom, that we became free, yes, thank God, Baruch Hashem, as we say, but free for what reason? Why are we free? What are we going to do with our freedom? Freedom is, first of all, a right. But after you have the freedom, what is the responsibility? What do you do with your freedom? What do you choose with your freedom? And that, we say, is receive the Torah as a guidepost for how we want to invest our freedom into ways that are holy and sacred and moral, please God, with God's help. So we're connecting freedom with receiving the Torah. It's custom to recite the blessing to count after the second night Seder, that the first night of the Omer is the first one, and have the intention of connecting Passover to the idea of freedom, but freedom for something. And that might actually be a conversation you might have with people at the table. What I know, please God, we'll be free. Hopefully, please God, next year soon we'll be free from our houses from COVID-19. What are we going to do with our freedom? Aware of what it's like to be quarantined, to be at stay at home. What are we going to do about people in the world who are still not free? What about people in the world, even in our own country, who are still struggling with, they may have certain freedoms, but not all the freedoms due to financial vulnerability or physical challenges, whatever it may be, or emotional challenges. How do we help everyone to be free? And that touches, and just to say one last thing about Matzah at the end, which Rabbi Jay noted beautifully, is that it's a chance for us to kind of make our hopes for the world, for what's going to be in the future. You know, see, next year in Jerusalem, some of us, God willing, we're going to go to Jerusalem. We're going to go and visit Israel. We're going to spend time there. Or next year in Jerusalem could be also something in a grander sense. That what does it mean to have a world redeemed? What is it we want this world to be healed from? Clearly, this pandemic is one of them, but there are other plagues and challenges as well. So what do we pray for? What would the perfect world be for us, please God, soon and in our days?
So we're going to end with next year in Jerusalem. We hope that this compilation of interpretations and questions and insights have stimulated some of your own curiosity, perhaps to bring in some new traditions to your Seder, some new conversation. But I want to say that part of our Jerusalem, our Yerushalayim, is a community that is whole and that is reunited in the year to come. L'shana haba v'Yerushalayim, l'shana haba v'Yerushalayim, l'shana haba v'Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim habnuya, l'shana haba v'Yerushalayim, l'shana haba v'Yerushalayim, l'shana haba v'Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim habnuya. A zisten Pesach, a sweet Pesach, a safe and healthy Pesach. Please God, we look forward to seeing you in more programs and activities over the course of Pesach week. Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach.
Shlichak.